This is an interview with the Honorable Anthony A. Alaimo, Senior United States District Court Judge for the Southern District of Georgia, being conducted on March 4, 2005, as a part of the Richard B. Russell Documentary Oral History Series by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. This interview is being conducted in the courtroom of Judge Alaimo in the Federal Building in Brunswick, Georgia, where he has sat as a federal district court judge for almost 35 years. My name is Charles Campbell, and I have been asked by the Russell Library to conduct this interview. The transcript of this interview will be available to researchers, students, and visitors to the Russell Library in Athens. Judge Alaimo had already lived a remarkable life before being appointed as federal judge in 1971. Born in 1920 on the island of Sicily off the coast of Italy, he came to the United States with his family at age 2 and grew up in Jamestown, New York, where he attended grade school and high school. Upon graduation from high school, he enrolled in Ohio Northern University. Upon his graduation from Ohio Northern, during the middle of World War II, he immediately enlisted in the Army Air Corps as a fighter pilot. Upon the completion of his training, he was assigned to the European theater in World War II. His aircraft was shot down by German artillery in a bombing raid of an electrical facility in Holland. Severely injured, he ditched his plane in the North Sea, where all the members of the crew, other than Judge Alaimo, perished. He was captured by German patrol boats and spent over a month in German hospitals prior to being assigned to a German prisoner of war camp. While incarcerated, Judge Alaimo participated in a number of daring escape attempts, including the one that later became the subject of the film, The Great Escape. After the war, Judge Alaimo came back to the United States and attended law school at Emory University School of Law on the GI Bill. Following graduation from Emory Law School, he entered law practice in Atlanta, where he had a successful trial practice for 10 years. He then moved to the Georgia coast, settling in Brunswick, Georgia, where he had a very successful trial practice for almost 15 years, before being appointed federal judge in December of 1971 by President Nixon. He served as chief judge of the Southern District Court from November 1, 1976 until March 28, 1990. We will talk about all of this and more in the next hour and a half. I want to begin by thanking you, Judge Alaimo, for participating in this oral history interview with the Russell Library.
Probably ought to thank you.
Well, we're delighted to be here, and you have such a remarkable life to talk about that an hour and a half is not very long to do it. And toward the end of the interview, we're going to talk about your service as a federal district judge for almost 35 years. But let's start at the beginning. You were born in Sicily. You probably don't remember much about the 2 years there, but tell us something about your family and your early life.
My parents were peasants. In fact, that was one of the reasons, of course, they wanted to come here to this country. It was the only hope that many of those people had. They were both illiterate. There was no public education in Italy at that time. And what had happened is that my father was in the Italian army during World War I, and upon his being discharged from the Italian army, he then, about a year later, wanted to come here to the United States. The family had, before World War I, actually lived in Bahia Blanca, Argentina for 5 years, where 2 of my sisters were born.
What was the reason for going to Argentina?
The same reason for coming here. And they actually went back to Italy just on a visit, and World War I broke out, and he was conscripted. And so they never returned to South America.
When you and your family came to the United States when you were 2 years old, did you come through Ellis Island?
We did. And as a matter of fact, some time ago, my wife got on the internet and was able to find the actual ship documents that contained the names of our family coming through Ellis Island.
Well, how about that?
Yes.
How about that? And then you settled in Jamestown, New York.
We did.
And that's in upstate New York, correct?
Well, it's in southwestern New York,
Southwestern.
south of Buffalo.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And what did your mother and father do there?
Oh, well, my father was just a laborer. He was a bricklayer, principally, and my mother was just a housewife. Now, my mother was actually illiterate throughout her life, whereas my dad did teach himself how to read and write when he was down in South America. Mm-hmm. But that was their status.
I've heard you say in other interviews that while your mother was illiterate, she was an amazing woman.
She was a brilliant woman. She really was.
It just goes to show you don't have to have education to
No,
be great.
you do not. And she always had the thirst to see that her children got educated. That was one of the main things in her life that she always impressed us with.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
We were 7 altogether. There were 4 girls and 3 boys. Mm-hmm.
And everybody came to Jamestown?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
And what was it like growing up in Jamestown? You had come from Italy, so I guess you learned the English language.
Yes, you know, children learn a language, a foreign language much more easily than adults do. But I don't ever remember not knowing how to speak English.
How about at home? Did your parents learn English, or did you speak
No, they
Italian?
did not. They spoke broken English, but we spoke in Italian around the home. We went to an Italian Methodist church where the sermons were in Italian. And of course, my folks were very religious people, and as a result, we read a lot of Bible. And reading the Bible in Italian, all of us kids generally learn formal Italian. Other than that, most Italians speak in dialect, and the dialects are very different.
Now, you said that you went to the Methodist church.
Yes.
I had probably made the assumption that you were Catholic coming
Well,
from...
initially we were. And then my parents became converted when I was about 8 years old. And after that, they were very devout Methodists.
What were you interested in growing up? What was your avocation or interest?
Well, just as any other kid, you know, we went out and played and things of that nature, yes.
Well, you became a boxer at one point, didn't you?
Not when I was when I was a kid, you know, you had your usual fisticuffs with your playmates. But I really didn't get into boxing until I went to college.
Oh, is that right?
Went into Golden Gloves at that time. Mm-hmm. You know, they had those tournaments every year.
Pat, how much did you weigh then?
147.
147. And so did you box throughout your time in college?
Well, yes, but it was sporadic. You know, once you had the tournaments once a year. That's the only time you really got out there and box.
You never viewed yourself as making a living boxing?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
What year did you graduate from high school?
1937.
1937.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went and enrolled in Ohio Northern University.
I did.
How did that come about?
Well, my brother had gone there before me. He was a ministerial student, and it was a Methodist college, Ohio Northern was. And the year he graduated, while I came on, he went on to Northwestern to do graduate work, and I succeeded him there. And
how were you able to afford to go to college?
Well, I was a barber.
A barber?
Yes.
Did it make you tempt you to become a barber?
Well, my brother induced me to do that when he said that if you really want to go to college, you better learn how to cut hair. And he had been a barber there and had established a shop in the college town that I just took over when I came on. But really,
that was the way you paid for your college.
It was, and I was really more affluent than most of the kids that were. You know, that was a Depression year where none of the kids had much money. But
that didn't tempt you, though, to become a barber as a career.
Not really. You know. No.
Was it while you were in college that you first became interested in being a lawyer?
Yes, sir. And that really was prompted by the fact that I could take all my classes in the morning, and therefore could have my shop open all afternoon. whereas in the other schools, you had classes in the afternoon. So that was a sort of a reason why I went into law school.
Did you have a good college experience at Ohio Northern?
Yes. Oh, yes. I grew up there. See, I was 17 when I went there, and I sort of grew up.
Did you make good grades?
No, not really. I mean, mediocre.
And what degree did you get?
Bachelor of Arts.
And that was in what year?
1940.
1940. So World War II was underway.
Yes, it was.
But the U.S. had not joined the war.
Not yet.
Okay.
No. But we had all registered for the draft, if you remember.
Right.
Well, you wouldn't remember.
Well, I was born in 1942, so that was just a couple of years before then.
Yeah.
But when you graduated from college, though, you almost immediately voluntarily enlisted in the military.
No, I did not. I actually went to work for a defense manufacturer in Detroit, where I had a sister living. And I didn't enlist in the Air Corps until the day after Pearl Harbor, when I drove up from Detroit to Selfridge Field and enlisted in the Air Corps.
So prior to Pearl Harbor, did you have any intent of enlisting?
No, not really.
It was caused by Pearl Harbor?
Yes, yes.
And you enlisted in the Army Air Corps. What made you want to be a pilot? Had you had any experience in aviation? Or?
None whatever. It was just the thrill and the anticipated excitement of being a pilot.
And at that time, in order to qualify for that program, you had to have a college degree.
Yes, you did. You did. And pass a pretty stringent physical exam.
So you went into training, I assume, to be because you'd never flown.
No, never had.
What kind of training would you get that would equip you to fly bombing raids?
Well, we all
you didn't bomb places during training, I'm assuming.
Not really. Well, except when we were down in Tampa, Florida, we did try to bomb Gandy Bridge by dropping a crate full of oranges.
So
but,
how long did your training take?
9 months.
9 months. Okay.
Yes.
And did you feel at the end of that you were
qualified?
Yes.
Not to fly B-26.
Did you train in an open cockpit or a closed cockpit?
Well, both.
Both.
But the open cockpit was the primary trainer and the intermediate trainer. Then advanced training was the so-called AT-6, which had a canopy, And then went to Tampa, Florida in B-26s and was checked out as a first pilot after 10 hours. So you can imagine what my proficiency was with a B-26.
Did you go to, and then I assumed after you completed your training you were assigned to a theater of the war, the European theater in this case.
Yes.
How did you get to Europe? Did you go on a ship or?
No, we flew over, and as I've often said, it would have been a tour director's dream, the trip that we took overseas, because we were originally scheduled to go to Puerto Rico, ran through a cold front, a terrible front, ran out of gas and stopped in San Domingo for a week because they had to lengthen the runway for our ships.
Then when you say ships, you're talking about your aircraft.
Yeah. The B-26. And then went to Borinquen Field in Puerto Rico, from there to Trinidad, then to Guyana, is it pronounced now? But it was Guyana then, British Guyana. Then on down to Belém in Brazil, and that's where we had heard about this very famous place called Madame Zézé's, which, as you can imagine, was a bordello. And someone asked me, well, what was it like? And I said, the line was too long. Anyhow, from there we went to Natal, which was on the point, the western point, or the eastern point, rather, of Brazil. From there to Ascension Island, and then to Accra on the Gold Coast of Africa. And then from there up to Monrovia, and then Gambia, Then we were supposed to go to Dakar, but the Germans were still there. So then we flew across the Sahara to Marrakesh, and that was a beautiful city. Mm-hmm. And we're there 3 weeks, staying at the, if you've ever been there, the Mamounia Hotel, which is a five-star hotel now, but just a magnificent place. And then from there to a place now called Kenitra, and then to England.
My goodness, how long did this trip take?
A month.
A month.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see why you called it a tour operator's dream.
Oh, yeah, it was magnificent, really. I'd hate to pay for it in today's dollars.
So you're in England. At this point, did you have an appreciation of the danger and risk of these bombing raids?
No, not really. 20 years old, 21 years old, and no, you didn't. You didn't have an appreciation. Of course, you were told we were actually going to embark on a novel method of flying. That was flying as low as you could.
That was to avoid the radar?
To avoid the radar and then accuracy in bombing.
When you say low, how low are you talking about?
I'm talking about as low as you could get.
Like under 100, like 100 feet?
Oh, less than that.
Oh, my goodness.
In fact, I used to say, of course, not entirely accurately, that you could see the wake of the airplane ahead of you flying across the Atlantic or the ocean at that time.
Well, you could only, I assume, fly in clear weather then. You couldn't,
oh, yes.
You couldn't fly if it was cloudy, for example,
or sure you
raining.
Could. Sure you could.
That low?
Well, oh, sure. Sure.
Now, I think it was in May.
Yes.
That the mission that you were on.
May the 17th.
And that was in 43. 43, okay. Mm-hmm. And tell us what happened, just kind of begin what you were bombing, what the target was, and then how it happened and how you wound up in the North Sea.
This was one group, and as it turned out, there were only 11 ships. Normally there would have been 12 planes in the group. And we were the only ones at that time, medium bombers in England, that were operational. And as we flew over there, I was tail end Charlie in my flight. And we were down, as I say, as low as you could get. About halfway across, one of the pilots had some engine problem, and he pulled up to 1,000 feet. And we later realized that when he did that, their radar caught us, because when we hit the coast, we went through a hail of small fire, machine gun, small cannons.
Now, this was the coast of what? What were you going to bomb?
Coast of Holland.
Holland.
We were supposed to bomb a power plant in Holland. Emory was the name of the town, south of Amsterdam. And, well, we kind of missed the point we were supposed to go in at because we hit an unexpected crosswind, which pushed us south. And we ran around some 15 or 20 minutes trying to get back on course. And,
were you being shot at all this time?
All the time, just shot at. All the ships were lost. Every one of them was shot down. I saw our our group commander, as a matter of fact, hit, and his ship flipped over on its side. He went into the one of the canals. And I thought for sure that they would all be dead, but when I got to the hospital, he was in the hospital, had only a couple of broken ribs. And it was just fantastic, the things that happened that you couldn't possibly explain logically. We got hit, and one engine was on fire. Then we got to the bombing target and dropped our bombs. One of the problems was that they had decided we'd use 30-minute delay bombs to enable the Dutch to get away from the area and not be hurt.
You mean once you dropped the bomb and hit the ground, it'd be
30
minutes before it exploded?
30 minutes before it exploded. Because I heard the bombs exploded when I was out there in the water out in the North Sea. But anyhow, after we crossed we got hit again, and the other engine went on fire, and then we realized we were going to have to ditch. And we did. We were about 5 miles off the coast, and we ditched.
Now, had you been shot at this point?
Oh, yes. Yes. I was shot someplace on when we were over the coast. Shot through the leg and into the hip. And I had made up my mind then that if I ever went back, I was going to have some armor plate on my seat, because I got a couple of slugs in my hip.
Mm. So
Anyhow.
once you had one engine on fire.
Yes.
And then, so what did you do then?
Well, feathered that engine, and then a short time later, the other engine was on fire. So we realized then that we were going to have to ditch. And went in at about 200 miles per hour, went into the ocean. And I had just seconds before that flipped open the overhead hatches over the pilot and co-pilot compartment. And shortly before, I had pulled a fire extinguisher cable, which was behind my seat, and required me to unfasten my seatbelt to get back to pull the cable. And I never refastened my safety belt. And that, as I've said before, really saved my life, because somehow I got flipped through that through the overhead hatch, and I don't know, really, I don't know how I got out, to tell you the truth. All I remember is when I came to, I was underwater with my foot caught on something, and I finally kicked loose and came up and inflated my Mae West.
Did you suffer more injuries when the plane hit the sea?
Yeah, I had broken nose, broken collarbone, and then had some scrapes, but no serious injuries.
So you'd been shot through the hip.
Yes, and
broken
the leg.
nose, broken collarbone.
Yeah.
And you're in the North Sea.
Right. Very cold.
Were all the other members of the crew, so far as you know, still alive when it was ditched in the sea?
Yes, they were, but they obviously drowned.
So you were the only one that was able to get out?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and again, I don't know how I got out.
So what happened after after you got out?
I was out there.
It was quite cold, I assume.
Oh, yeah, it was cold. We had escape kits, and in the escape kits there was a syringe with morphine. And I gave myself that shot, and it really helped when I was out there in the North Sea bobbing around. On our Mae West, we had police.
By the way, just for people that will see this in the future, what is a Mae West?
Mae West was a life preserver you wore around your neck, and you fastened around your waist, and it had a little cylinder that you could pull the plunger and inflate it, and it was a life preserver, and that's what kept me up during that period of time. I could see German patrol boats out in the distance, and of course I blew the devil out of that whistle, wanting to be picked up.
How long do you think you could have survived in that water?
No more than 3 or 4 hours, if that long. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you wanted to be
very much
captured.
so.
If it was the Germans, you wanted to be captured.
Anybody. Mm-hmm. Yeah, been anybody.
And once you were picked up by the German patrol boat,
they were very good to me. They laid me out on deck, cut away my trousers, and gave me first aid, gave me a shot of brandy, and gave me the general admonition that all the POWs got, and that's, for you the war is over, which was true.
Did the Germans speak English?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did you speak German at that time?
No, not at all. Mm-hmm. No.
Mm-hmm. And then you were taken to a hospital,
To a hospital in Amsterdam, Amsterdam General Hospital. And we were all in, the survivors, there were 1/3 who survived, which is just absolutely
You mean
miraculous.
of your group?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Nobody in your plane survived, but
no,
1/3 of your total group.
No. Mm-hmm. In the hospital room, we were, I think there were 8 or 10 of us, 10 as a matter of fact, in the room. And we were there about a week. And we received the same treatment, medical treatment, that injured Luftwaffe men and soldiers had received.
Were these German doctors?
Yes, yes, they were. And then we were shipped from there to Frankfurt on the Main. And I was taken to a hospital outside of Frankfurt, which I thought was a mental institution because the walls were all padded with leather. And I was there for some 3 weeks where, and when I was interrogated by the Germans.
Did you undergo any rough interrogation?
Not really, no. Repetitious and that sort of thing, and but nothing other than that.
And the quality of the medical care you received, you said that was basically the same as a German wounded soldier would.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then was that when you were then assigned to a prisoner of war camp?
Well, we were sent to a dispersal camp called Dulag Luft, a very famous place where all Air Force POWs went through, and were there 3 or 4 days, and then assigned to Stalag Luft 3.
And we're going to discuss some very interesting experiences you had while you were in the camps. But how many different prisoner of war camps were you in during your incarceration?
2. Well, Dulag Luft was really not an internment camp. Stalag Luft 3 and Moosburg.
And where was the first of these located?
It was located in what is now Poland, southeast of Berlin, about 90 miles, near Breslau.
And the second one was near Munich?
Yes,
correct?
Yes.
Okay. What level of knowledge did you have about how the war was progressing? Did you get current news?
We did.
Okay.
We had German newspapers, we had the German radio broadcast, and then, as I mentioned to you earlier, we had some secret BBC reports. We had hidden radios, and I didn't even know where it was, and it was a very secret thing. But every day we'd have one of the prisoners we called Kriegies would come around to each block and report the daily news that came out over BBC. So we knew what was going on.
So, for example, when D-Day occurred, you knew that?
Oh, yes, we did. Mm-hmm. We did.
Now, what information was given your parents about where you were? What did they know?
Well, they didn't get information about where I was for about 6 months.
Did they think you were just missing in action, or?
Well, they thought I was really originally reported dead in action, and then about 6 months later, they got the information that I was POW.
Mm-hmm. There was a film called The Great Escape, and you had a role in what became The Great Escape. Tell us about how that happened.
Very short role. When I first was interned there at Stalag Luft 3, I was in what was called the British compound. The British, of course, had been there since 1939, you know.
Were these all pilots now?
All air crew.
All air crew.
Yes, bombardiers, navigators, and so on. And we were assigned to this one compound in Stalag Luft 3. And they, at that time, had 3 tunnels going. They were very escape conscious, and of course they had been, as I say, been there quite a while. And they were very good on intelligence. They much better than the Americans were as far as intelligence was concerned. The tunnels were called Tom, Dick, and Harry. Well, one of them was discovered, and the other one was just then saved as a place to dispose of the sand, because the sand down 30 feet deep was of a different color from the one up on top. So that they had to find a place to disperse the sand so that they wouldn't be detected.
How could you dig a tunnel in a prison camp without the Germans knowing about it?
Oh, listen, it's just like the inmates we have here, they're always smarter than the people that are holding them. And we used to, you know, we'd have periodic checks by the Gestapo, and we stole more stuff from them than they got from us. But they were able to do it. You know, they'd had a lot of experience. They had an elaborate system of what we call stooging, so we knew where every German in that compound was. And whenever one of the so-called ferrets, we called them, got close to where the digging was taking place, you know, the signal would go down, stop everything, and they did. And
but for example, did you just dig a hole in the middle of the...
Oh, well, no, they dug, they were very ingenious on traps. And what they did is each room had a little concrete base where the stove was. They moved aside this concrete base and dug the entry down into the tunnel there, the shaft in there, because it went down 30 feet, so as not to have any digging detected by the seismographs, which the Germans had in all the surrounding fences.
So the idea was to dig down 30 feet,
30
and,
feet,
and then dig
right,
out?
And then go straight out. And the distance out was about 350 feet. As I said, the British were ingenious. They stole some cable. They had this tunnel wired with electricity, because before the time they did that, you know, all you had was little lamps that you made out of the margarine we got, and a piece of cloth to act as a wick. They had a little sort of track to put little carts that would haul the sand back. They had let me explain this to you. Being sand, you had to shore it up, and it was solidly shored by what we had bed boards. All our bunks had bed boards of boards, 1x6 boards, and 1x4 boards, exactly 28 inches long. And they were notched at the end and fit together so that you had a solid tunnel.
What would the German guards say when they came by and a bedboard was missing?
Oh, well, they didn't count the bedboards, you know. That's one thing they didn't do. But what really happened is towards the end, a lot of the guys could barely stay afloat because they had to give up so many of their bedboards that their mattresses were just about to sink down. But
did you have any misgivings about getting involved in this when you?
None whatever. No, I wanted to.
Weren't you afraid that if you were detected, you'd be executed, or?
No, not really. No, nobody had been executed up until that point.
What was your role? What did you do in connection with what became the Great Escape?
They had to have an air system in the tunnel, which was composed of a pipe or tube fabricated by putting tin cans together, empty tin cans, and soldered. The corned beef cans all had some solder on them that they were able to use. And to it was attached a pump made out of a tarred sack, and a hoop made out of wire to give it an accordion effect back and forth. And the guy that ran the pump would sit there like in a rowing machine and pump this thing back and forth, and that's what I did.
That's what got the air down so they could breathe.
Yes, down at the face of the tunnel. And we had 4-hour stints that you'd sit there and pump that thing back and forth.
And the Germans,
that's what I did.
And the Germans never detected any of this?
No, not in that tunnel. They didn't.
So did you, once the tunnels...
I was there only about 4 months, because then they moved us out to a new compound that they had built for the Americans. And the tunnel was finally broken about 10 months after that.
Was the tunnel big enough for people that were digging it to turn around?
No, that was, yes, they had two turnaround places called Piccadilly Circus and Leicester Square. And there you could turn around. But otherwise, you see, you had 28 inches square or less, the 2 or 3 inches for the interlocking, and you just couldn't turn around.
So when the tunnels were used for the escape, you were not there then. You had already been transferred out.
Yeah, we were 10 months after that.
And that turned out to be lucky, did it?
Well, it did. Of course, we all felt, so unlucky that when we knew it was going to get broken.
What happened to the people who did it? How many people escaped, and what happened to them?
About 75 escaped. They recaptured about 50 of them. Well, they recaptured all of them except 3 who got away. There were 2 Norwegian and 1 Dutch who had been in the Royal Air Force who made it back. But other than that, everybody else was caught.
So none of the Britishers really escaped?
No, they did not. And 50 of them were shot on direct orders by Hitler. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Goering, who was pretty jealous of the way the Air Force personnel were treated, had tried to talk him out of that, but was unable to do it.
Now, by the time that happened, you're in this different facility.
Yes.
Did it have any impact on the way you all were treated?
Oh, my, yes. They came in the night that the escape occurred, and with automatic rifles, put us all out, and they were the parade ground, or the ground where we had to go out every day to be counted. And kept us out there all night, and it was cold, let me tell you, at that time. And they shorted us on rations, but not for long. Not for long.
Mm-hmm. Now, after the people that escaped in the Great Escape experienced the fate they did that take away your desire to try to escape?
No.
You still wanted to?
Sure.
And you actually finally did escape, didn't you?
Yeah.
Tell us how that happened. Now this was at a different facility,
yes,
right?
Was.
You'd been transferred.
Yes, it was. In January of 45, the Russians were close enough to where we could hear their artillery. And so the Germans came in one night and said, we're going to leave here in 30 minutes. Get your stuff together. And we were all marched out of there, and were marched for about 65 miles, straight miles, and it was terrible. That was the worst experience that I went through.
It was very cold?
Oh, my, yes. I'd often talked about scoffing at people who claim that their socks froze to their feet, and boy, it happened to the soles of my shoes.
How far did you have to march?
65
miles.
Yeah.
During the night?
Yes, and day. You couldn't march very far, 7 or 8 miles at most. And then we were placed in boxcars, and that wasn't very happy either, because we were so crowded you couldn't lie down except in shifts.
How long were you in the boxcar?
3 days.
3 days.
And were taken down to a big camp near Munich at Moosburg, where there were every name, shape, and race of person is a prisoner of war there. And the very first day we were put into delousing compounds. We'd not had any showers of any kind during the time we were there at Guthrie V. And but there they put us in where there were hot showers to get rid of the lice that we had in. Well, there was only a single fence surrounding this particular compound. And so 2 other guys and myself decided we'd try to get out. And I cut the wire, and we got a couple of German-speaking prisoners to divert the guards, and we got out.
Were the other 2 people that were in this with you, were they Americans?
Oh, yes, sure. One One from Philadelphia, another one from Florida. Anyhow, we got out and tried to walk during the night, and it was just very difficult. No lights of any kind, at that time. There was complete blackout. And then we decided we'd do it in the daytime, going south, towards Munich.
You got out and then got back in at night?
No. We were out walking,
Mm-hmm.
and we slept in what turned out to be a damn hog barn. We couldn't tell what it was, but we crossed this field and got there and spent the one night there. And then the next day, as we were walking through a small town, a German private stopped and asked who we were and wanted to see your papers. Well, of course, we had no papers. I tried to tell him we were French workers. I could speak French. And he would have none of it. He put us in this little country jug that had about 7 or 8 locks on it. Well, the next morning when he came to take us back to camp, as he was locking these locks, one of the other guys said, "Let's go." And we did. We ran. And I was dumb enough, I should have stayed there and let the other two go off to where he would not be able to, of course, go after everybody. But he went on out, and what was kind of amusing after is I was running away from him. I was going around a curve, and my shoulder hit a telephone pole and knocked me down. I thought he'd shot me. He came up and put the pistol in my face and said, "Where are your buddies?" And I said, "I don't know." Well, he went in and got a rifle and got them out. They were out in the field, and they came out, and we were taken back to Moosburg.
So this is two escape attempts that you've been involved in. Didn't turn out too good, did
No, they did not.
Did that convince you that maybe you shouldn't try it?
No, not really. Not really. You had a distorted view of things. You had a distorted view of how the war was really going, because not long before that they'd had the Bastogne thing, where, we were in the cooler at that time. I was, and the German guard came in and said, "We've captured 20,000 prisoners. We're going towards Antwerp, and we're going to push the Allies into the sea and then take care of the Russians." He really believed it. And of course, we didn't know any better, but you had a real distorted view of what was happening.
So you tried another escape?
Well, no, we had tried another escape from Stogla 3. This Floridian, Ace Langberg, and I, around the camp were 2 14-foot high fences, and there was barbed wire entanglement in between them. There were gates, of course, where the horse-drawn wagons would bring the provisions into the car. And they had closed one of these gates, and I had noticed that there were ruts that were pretty deep under the gates, and they had not been filled or leveled off. And I thought that we could get under those gates and get out. And, of course, you couldn't escape at that time without getting approval of the senior American officer, who happened to be Charles Goodrich, a colonel from Augusta, believe it or not. A wonderful man. But anyhow, we got clearance on it. We had everything timed, and they were going to have it was in January, and they were going to have a big snow fight outside during the Pell time, the time that they counted everybody.
Would this have been January of 44? Or would it have been 45?
No, it wouldn't have been 45. It would have been 44. It was early on. We got the on signal, and as it turned out, it was wrong. He gave us the wrong signal. He was a lieutenant colonel. And I jumped. There was a warning fence, 3 feet high, that was about 30 feet from the main fence. And I vaulted that, and I was actually not supposed to do that unless there was another lieutenant colonel who, at the minute before we jumped the fence, would give us a signal about whether it was on or not. Well, the thing was off because there had been a bunch of German soldiers in the off-logger, but he was not at the place he was supposed to be, so I just jumped the fence and went at it. Well, the thing had been called off, and as I tried to crawl under that gate, it was not quite as wide an aperture as I thought it had been, and I jiggled the fence, you know, and we were right at the guardhouse, which is up about 14 feet, and the guard who was up there felt the tremor and turned around and saw me down there, and he grabbed his machine gun and started to fire, but it for some reason or other just was jammed.
You were very lucky at that point.
And how? And how? Well, we were taken, you went to what they call the cooler for 21 days on bread and water.
And then you were put back in the
then put back
in the population.
Yeah, sure.
So you've had 3 attempts now that didn't turn out very well.
Yeah.
But you did another one.
Well, the one that finally succeeded.
Tell us about that one. What happened then?
Well, at that time, as I mentioned to you earlier, officers couldn't work under the Geneva Convention, but the enlisted men could. Every morning about 5 o'clock, the Germans would take the enlisted men, put them in boxcars, and take them on down to Munich to clean out rubble from because it was bombed every day at that time. And about that time, a group of enlisted men came into our compound, and I induced one of the guys to switch with me.
You were switching for an enlisted man's
Yes,
dog tag?
yes, and he would come on in as an officer. He thought that would be so much better, which it really wasn't. But we switched, and the next morning I went out on one of these working parties. And what was unusual about it is that right at the very beginning, it was dark. It was around 5 o'clock in the morning. We were walking to the rail yard, and the Germans started to spot check everybody. And fortunately, the guy who was in our line began searching the guy ahead of me, and while he was searching him, I got around and went on down to the boxcar. And unfortunately, at that time, there was another guard who was doing some searching. And again, I didn't know what to do about whether to wait and try to sweat it out toward the end when he might give it up.
Why did you not want to be searched?
Well, I had, you know, a hoard of chocolate bars from Red Cross parcels and things of that nature.
That was considered to be contraband?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, not only that, but the jig would have been up. The only reason I'd had that would have been because I was trying to escape. Mm-hmm. He was, again, searching the guy ahead of me, and I was able to throw my knapsack where I had this stuff in the corner of the boxcar, and he didn't see it. So I got by, and we got into Munich that morning. We were working.
So let me, in other words, as you were leaving to go on this work detail, you had in mind escaping that day.
Oh, yes.
That's what you were going to try to do.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, and did. When we got to Munich, we were taken to an army school, and there was an air raid. We were down into the basement, and when we got down there, I was able to get away from the group and go into a room that was had the windows had all been shattered and knocked out and so on, and was pretty much disarray. Went in there and took off my GI clothes, which I had on over these civilian clothes.
So you had civilian clothes under your GI clothes?
Yes, yes, worn civilian clothes. And started to crawl out the window, which was about eye level. And as I did, the German sergeant who was in charge of our detail was walking up the walk, looking right at where I was, but somehow he didn't see me. Now, I'll never understand that, because he was looking right at me, and I thought I could see his eyes. But anyhow, he didn't notice me. And I crawled out and walked down route number 2.
So you're out in the street
Yeah.
in Germany, but you don't have any papers.
No, none. None.
And how were you able to just walk down the street without being checked, or?
Yes, you were, and one of the difficulties was not turning around to see if anybody was following you, you know. But at any rate, I knew the approximate location of what they called French commando camps, and they were impressed Frenchmen who were operating the big state farms that the Germans had. And it was in a small town called Grunwald, not far south of Munich. And so I did go there, and sure enough, they put me up for the night.
How did you know where that place was?
Well, I didn't. I knew it was south of town someplace. And I roamed around and was able to see this big, barbed wire fences again around the place.
And did they know you were an American GI?
I told them. I told them who I was, and they said, sure, they put us up for the night. As a matter of fact, what is really hilarious, we played bridge. And for the only time in my life, I made a grand slam, doubled and redoubled, and no trump.
You remember that?
Boy, do I. But it's just strange. But anyhow, they then gave me the directions to the next camp farther south, and gave me some food, some bread. And so the next day I tramped on down to this next town, and the directions to it were rather bizarre. They said, you'll go into this town of Traubing and go to the south end of town, and there'll be a fork in the road. And in one of the roads of the fork will be a farmhouse, and there'll be a Frenchman pitching hay in the farmyard. Well, you know, I thought that was really... But anyhow, I did just that, and sure enough, there was a Frenchman. You could spot him, you know, they had on berets, who was pitching hay on a wagon. And he took me to the camp, and I spent the night there. And they gave me directions to the next one.
So you just went from these camps
Yes.
through. You're still in Germany now.
Yes. Oh, yes. And then went to Starnberg, which was a much larger city. And there the barracks chief, a Frenchman, we discussed where I should try to go. I thought I would go into Switzerland from Germany. And he said, no, there'll be too many, there are too many guards on the Swiss border. And since I knew I was fluent in Italian, he said, your best bet is to go into Italy.
Of course, Italy was on the side with Germany.
At that time, sure. Mm-hmm. He bought me a rail ticket down to Garmisch-Partenkirchen and then to Innsbruck. And that night took me to the station and slipped the ticket to me in my hand. And as I went to board the train, the Gestapo was checking papers, and there was an iron pipe fence that separated us from where the rail car was. It was dark, of course, again. I vaulted that fence, and the Gestapo didn't see me do it. He got on the train.
You'd have gotten caught there, you would.
Oh yeah, the jig would have been up. Yeah.
Would they have executed?
Particularly with the Gestapo. Well, I don't know. You never, during war, you didn't know what these guys would do.
So now you're making your way through Italy.
Well, no, I was making my way through Germany.
You're not into Italy yet.
No, hadn't gotten to Innsbruck yet. Went to Innsbruck and then went through the Brenner Pass into Italy. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky there too, because when we got to the pass itself, everybody disembarked. And I noticed that there was two groups of Italians who were being taken back as German prisoners of war, actually, by two guards. And there were 35 of them. One group was 18, the other one 17. Well, I sort of got around the one that had 17, And eventually, I guess the guard assumed he had the A team because he never said anything about my being there. Anyhow, we went on down to and stopped in Bolzano, and there got the first real warm meal I'd had in a long time of good spaghetti. Believe it or not, these Italian women had cooked the lunch for us.
That was a happy occasion,
oh,
wasn't it?
Oh boy, wasn't it though?
Now, during the time you were going through Italy, I read somewhere you had an interesting experience. You went to an opera.
Oh yes,
to an opera.
Well, in Milan, yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, I got to Milan on trucks because by that time all rail transport was just non-existent because the American Air Force would bomb it every day. And I was again lucked out, and as I've often said, the law of averages must have been suspended during that day because I had so many lucky breaks. But anyhow, I was able to get through a search there in Milan, and in Innsbruck, I had talked to an Italian who gave me some information about partisans in Milan.
You say partisans, somebody who would help people that were escaping.
Yes, there were very strong groups of partisans in northern Italy at that time.
The Italians and the Germans were not very close anyway.
No, the Italians hated the Germans. They just always have. But in any event, they gave me an address, and I went to that address, and as it turned out, it was a pastry shop. Can you imagine that for a hungry prisoner? Anyhow, I went to the proprietor and asked him if he knew who the particular man was, and he said, "Yeah, I know. I'll go get him." He went and came back and said, "He's gone. He's not here. What can I do for you?" Well, I decided then I would tell him. And as it turned out, he was a Sicilian. See? And he said, "No, I can help." I said, "If you can't help me, let me go." He said, "No, I can help you." Well, he put me up in an apartment, got me a new set of clothes, gave me money to where I could eat every day in a restaurant, believe it or not, at least the evening meal. In the day, I'd go to his pastry shop and eat some cookies. Anyhow, after I was there a couple of weeks, I said to him, "Can you get me into Switzerland?" And he said, "Yeah."
Now, did you go in? What was the opera? You were going to tell me about the opera you went to?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Before that, well, he took us all to the opera, some friends as well as myself, to the opera in Milan. It was not in La Scala because it had been damaged, but there was another opera house there. And as luck would have it, I sat next to a German SS colonel. Fortunately, he had his girlfriend with him, and he was more interested in the girlfriend than anything else. But, it was a barber of Seville, believe it or not.
So you eventually got into Switzerland, and Switzerland was neutral, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then,
but the experience I had there is when I went in and turned myself into the cops. During interrogation, they finally said, "You're not an American. You're an Italian." And I had Italian papers with me at the time, which I thought I'd keep as a souvenir, and it was dumb. But anyhow, I really blew up, and fortunately, a Swiss major had come in, and he laughed at me. He said, "We'll send you to Geneva. They'll know who you are." And sure enough, the next day, a Swiss private came and took me to the station. We went to Geneva.
How did your parents find out that you had escaped and were no longer a prisoner of war?
I wrote them a V-mail from Paris.
Okay. And that's the first time they knew that you were out?
Yes.
After the war, you came back and you got married to a young lady who you had met while you were in college.
Yes.
And you wound up in Atlanta. How did you happen to wind up in Atlanta?
A professor of mine in undergraduate school was a graduate of Emory. And he had suggested that I come down here. And that's what I did.
Had you ever been to Georgia before?
Never had. Well, been through it during the war, but not not to really come down here for any period of time.
And you had decided by then to go to law school.
Yes.
So you came to Atlanta specifically to go to the Emory Law School?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And was that on the GI Bill?
Yes.
Okay. Did that pay all your expenses?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how hard was it to get into Emory?
I walked up to the registrar's desk and said, I've got a degree from Ohio Northern University and I want to enroll in the law school, and I signed up.
You didn't take any LSAT or anything
Heavens,
of that kind?
no.
And so you were at Emory. How did you enjoy law school at Emory?
Oh, very much so. You know, I had probably one of the best classes that ever came out of Emory.
Were there a lot of other former GIs there
Yeah,
on the GI
most of
Bill?
them. Well, at least 90% of them were GIs.
You mean of the entire law school class?
Yeah, at that time. In that class, yes.
There were
Elmo Holt, Lewis Slayton, Earl Phillips.
These are prominent judges, lawyers,
Sure,
and
yeah.
district attorney in Atlanta.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And so you graduate from the Emory Law School, and then you went to practice with a well-known trial lawyer, Reuben Garland. How did you happen to go with Mr. Garland?
He was the only person who would hire me. I had tramped the streets of Atlanta for a month.
Did you go to the big firms and try to get a job?
I did. You know, Smythe Campbell said to me, you've got a good record at Emory, but you don't have the right background.
They weren't looking.
And he was right.
They weren't looking for anybody born in Sicily from
No.
Jamestown, New York.
No, not Smythe.
Reuben Garland, of course, was a very well-known and successful trial lawyer who was
Flamboyant.
somewhat controversial.
Flamboyant.
Flamboyant.
And controversial.
Yes.
Yes, you're right.
Did you try cases with him while you were there?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
you had an opportunity to observe him in action.
I did, and I was really lucky because I handled all the demurrer practice and all the pleadings, and really got a good education that way that I otherwise would not have gotten if I'd gone to a big firm, for instance.
I've heard it said before by other lawyers that he was great at cross-examination.
Oh, the best. Yeah. He
So
was
you
really
learned a
good.
lot of valuable skills.
Well, I did, but you had to put him together with his personality in order to make him work.
Now, he was held in contempt of court by a lot of judges.
Oh, yes,
And
very
what
much
was
so.
the reason for that? What would he do?
Well, he was a judge baiter. He would always walk almost right up to the jailhouse steps and then retreat and later come back again, and he kept doing that. And when the case lasted 3 or 4 days, he finally got to where the jury thought, well, that judge is biased, you know, and he worked that to perfection.
How well did he compensate you?
Reasonably well, yeah.
How many people were practicing
Well,
law?
originally it was $35 a week.
That doesn't sound like very good compensation now.
no,
but,
it doesn't.
But back then it probably
Oh,
was
boy.
not that bad.
Well, it was the best you could get. It was less than the elevator operator made. But
how many lawyers did Mr. Garland have practicing with him?
One other besides myself.
Now, he has a son that's a very prominent Atlanta
Yes.
lawyer now, Edward Garland.
Yes.
And I guess he was a young
Oh, he was just a little kid,
at
7
that
or 8
time.
years old.
Right. Did you ever have any second thoughts about practicing law in terms of whether that's what you wanted to do?
Yes, I did, because of the difficulty in really getting, and I realized that working there with Rube was not exactly the best place to be. My father-in-law, of course, had a big farm up in Ohio, and he kept importuning us to come up there. And we did then, in 1951, went up for 2 years.
That was after you'd been practicing with Reuben. How long?
Yes.
How long? For how long?
A couple of years.
A couple of years.
And then one November, I was picking corn in a snowstorm, believe it or not, and the gathering chain on the corn picker broke, and I had to get down and fix it. And boy, I froze, and I decided I'm going back to Atlanta and practice law.
Practicing law looked better than farming, didn't
Sure
it?
did.
So you came back to Atlanta?
Yes.
And did you go back with Mr. Garland?
Yes.
Okay. And how long did you practice with him at that point?
About 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you wound up in Brunswick.
Yes.
And how did that happen?
Well, we had been associated by Way Highsmith, who was a brilliant lawyer. Had 2 double firsts from Oxford, was Phi Beta from University of Georgia, just a brilliant guy, and had been general counsel to Hercules. But he was slave to the bottle, and it finally got him. He came back to practice law. And he had a very good damage suit down in Camden County, and he asked Rube to come on down and help him try the case, because Rube had pretty good reputation for final argument. And so I came on down to prepare the case, and we got the biggest verdict ever rendered in Georgia as of that time. And then later on, there was another case that he associated us in. There was a real estate commission case where we got a verdict for $165,000.
It was a lot of money then, wasn't it?
Boy, wasn't it? You know, as a real estate commission in particular. But anyhow, I had become disenchanted with Rube pretty badly because, you know, he was considered for Superior Court judgeship by Marvin Griffin. There was one open in Atlanta. And he at that time had said, don't think because I'm going to be judged that I am not going to get a share of the profits of this firm. Well, that was the end, and that's when, and by that time, Way Highsmith down here had importuned me to come on down here and join him. And my wife made the decision, you know.
Brunswick suited her better than Atlanta?
Well, I can't say that I was not disenchanted because there was just no activity down here, you know. The old proverbial saying about the most activity you saw was the old hound dog moving from one side of the street to the other.
Was Reuben upset when you decided to go?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so, and he badmouthed me down here.
So you came down here, and did you have essentially the same kind of practice you had in Atlanta?
Yes, a general practice in a small town. That's about all you have.
Was that representing both plaintiffs and defendants?
Yes, but mainly plaintiffs.
Plaintiffs, because you were very active in the plaintiffs' bar.
I was.
You were on the board of directors of the plaintiffs.
Yes, and I was one of the originators of the Georgia Trial Lawyers.
Right.
Yeah.
How would you compare the economics of the practice here compared to Atlanta? Did you do as well financially?
Yes.
Better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, better. Yes.
Yeah. And you practiced here for almost 15 years before you were named judge.
I did.
And that was in December of 1971.
Right.
When did you first become interested in being a judge, and what accounted for that?
Oh, I had always been interested in being a judge from the day I was sworn in as a lawyer, but never expecting that the chance would arise. And certainly I always was interested in this job.
I know you
had Superior Court.
I know you had some communication with Senator Russell.
I did.
In '68, because I was working in his office at that time, and
I did.
Judge Alexander Lawrence was selected. There were 2 judges at that time. Were there 1 or 2
One.
judges?
There was only one. That was Judge Scarlett.
Right. Judge Scarlett retired or died.
Well, he became senior.
Became senior, and then Judge Lawrence got that.
Yeah, he got the appointment.
And then did they create a new judge that the seat you got?
They did.
Okay.
When Nixon became president, remember that first year they increased the number of judges in Atlanta,
right,
as well as here.
And you got the additional judge.
Yes, I
here.
did.
Now, the Southern District, where you have sat for almost 35 years, goes all the way from Brunswick to Augusta.
Augusta and McRae.
McRae. How do you decide, or how did you decide back when there was only 2 judges, who would hear cases in which town?
Well, Judge Lawrence did, principally, and of course he was chief, and we had 6 divisions, statutory divisions, that we had to hold court in.
He was from Savannah.
Yes, he was from Savannah. He retained Savannah and Dublin and Swainsboro. And I was required to really move to Augusta. And I had Augusta, Waycross, and Brunswick.
And you had, obviously, in 35 years, you've had a lot of significant cases, but one of the most significant and well-known was the Georgia prison case, Guthrie V. Evans.
Yes.
Tell us about that case.
Well, I mentioned to you earlier that one of the first things that Alec Lawrence did for me was to get me to sign an order assuming all the cases coming out of the Reedsville prison, the Georgia State Prison.
Now that was Georgia's maximum security prison at that time.
It was, and still is. And it was, of course, in his division, in the Savannah division.
He didn't want those cases.
No, he did not, because you know you really got a whole bunch of them. But he had the order ready for me to sign when I was on that bench. Right after I lowered my hand, he slipped that over and said, "Sign this." So of course, I'd have signed anything.
He didn't ask you whether you wanted them.
Oh no. Well, I did, and I, of course, inherited those cases. In '72, an action was filed, not class at that time, by some black prisoners. Claiming, unhealthy conditions and things of that nature. Then the Assistant Attorney General, who was Dorothy Beasley, later judge up there, she came down and suggested that it be transferred into a class action involving all prisoner or inmate complaints.
At Reedsville?
Yes, at Reedsville alone. And it was. And in the course of it, we had some difficulty with a lot of the prisoners up there. They had a riot one time. And so we decided that we better have a monitor. And a monitor was hired, who came on down to observe the conditions and make suggestions and prepare orders for me to sign, rectifying many of the conditions that were there at the prison at that time. And it was sort of a monthly thing. They'd come in with some other order to be signed regarding the prison conditions. But with the state's approval and also cooperation, we were able to develop probably the best system among the state prisons that was in existence at that time, to where Georgia came to the very forefront in prison administration after it had been considered only as the chain gang place. That was a reputation we had nationally before that, and developed really an excellent system.
And the way that case was handled kind of became a model for prison cases around the country.
It did. And what happened then is what we accomplished there became adopted in all the other prisons in the state of Georgia.
There's a case going on in Atlanta now involving the Fulton County Jail, where a federal judge in Atlanta has appointed a monitor.
Yes.
Very similar to what was done.
Yes.
Now, among the lawyers that were involved in the Guthrie case was Sanford Bishop, who's now a congressman.
Columbus, yes, he
now
is.
A congressman.
And a very good one, too.
Mm-hmm. So there were some good lawyers in that case.
Oh, very good. Yes, very good lawyers.
Was that the most difficult case you've had?
It was. Mm-hmm. It was.
Another case you handled that got a lot of publicity up in Atlanta, where I'm from, involved a scandal at the Atlanta airport. And because the brother-in-law of one of the federal judges was one of the people indicted, all the judges up there disqualified themselves, and they brought you in to try that case.
Yes.
And I've heard some lawyers that participated in that case grumble about how hard you worked them. Tell us about that.
Well, it was a very controversial case, as you can recall, involving the Atlanta city administration of the airport. So I decided we'd sequester the jury.
Now, sequester the jury means that they stay in a hotel room throughout the whole trial.
That's right.
They can't go home?
That's right. They cannot go home or communicate with anybody at home. And it's not a desirable thing when it's an extended period of time. But they had anticipated that this case would take 6 weeks. Well, I knew that it wouldn't, because when you sequester a jury, that's all they've got to do. And you can spend a lot of time trying the case that otherwise you would be frittered away. Well, the lawyers representing the defendants, Larry Thompson was one, Bobby Lee Cook was another, and Emmett Bondurant. They didn't want the jury sequestered, as defendants very seldom did. Well, in any event, we did sequester them, and the case went on for 3 weeks. And we worked almost every Saturday and some Sundays at the request of the jury itself.
That's so they could get through quicker.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we did.
And the lawyers didn't like that.
No, they did not. And it was hard on them. There's no question about that. You have to be a lawyer trying a case to realize how hard it is to be in there that long. And they were pretty well exhausted. But nevertheless, the jury got a more compact case. See? Really, the evidence was all pretty cohesive, and they didn't have the family to discuss the case with, by going home. And as a result, we generally got through with the case much more quickly than you ever could otherwise.
Now, how old were you when that case was being tried?
It was 95, was it?
So it was about 10 years ago. So you were 75 years old at that time.
I was old. I've been old a long time.
I guess you figured that if a 75-year-old judge can go 7 days a week, these younger lawyers ought to be able to.
Well, I know, but then that was unfair, really. I realize it. But nevertheless, the important thing was to get the case tried. And if a lawyer had to suffer a little bit, he was being paid.
Now, aside from the prison reform case and the Atlanta airport case, what would you say is the most interesting case you've had, or can you say? You've had so many.
I really can't. It's all one great big pile of cases. Mm-hmm.
Do you enjoy trying civil cases more than criminal cases, or
about the same? Mm-hmm. Yes.
And in terms of the mixture, what percentage? Maybe now that you're a senior judge, it may be a little different. But if you're an active federal judge, district judge in this district, what percentage would be criminal compared to civil?
70-30.
Criminal?
No.
Civil.
Civil.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And the criminal cases have some special requirements about how quickly you try them.
Oh yes,
and
you
that
have
kind
to
of
try
thing.
them, as you know, pretty quickly under the Speedy Trial Act. Mm. But in the early days involving marijuana, of course, we had a lot of criminal cases. Mm-hmm. But now we very seldom have to try them. Because under the rule I initiated here in this district, I require the U.S. attorney to turn over his file before trial to the defendants. So you don't have any of these discovery disputes.
Was that not required prior to that time?
No, it's not required now, except under local rule. And the fact of the matter is, the defendants see what the government has, and they realize the best thing for them to do is not go to trial, but to work out a deal. Mm-hmm. So we very seldom try a criminal case anymore. They're all pleas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's the hardest part of being a federal judge?
Sentencing people to the penitentiary. Because then you act almost like God, don't you? And it doesn't get any better with age. It really doesn't.
Now, the Supreme Court of the United States has recently declared unconstitutional or invalidated the sentencing guidelines, which was guidelines that federal judges had to follow in sentencing criminal defendants. What is your view about the impact of that decision?
Well, so far, the cases indicate that there isn't much impact, in that most judges are using the guidelines in an advisory capacity, so that question doesn't arise much. And I never had any problem with it in that I generally got an admission by the defendant who was pleading guilty about the other facts that the Booker case is all about. So it didn't make any difference. In other words, that obviated the necessity of having a jury pass on it. So I never had any problem with them on that.
What's the most enjoyable part of being a federal judge?
Well, what I enjoy more, and that's personal to me, is the ceremonies where we admit citizens.
You mean
because that's the way I became a citizen, just the same as
You mean naturalized citizens that
Sure.
are...
We have 3 or 4 times a year, and I usually go down and speak to them individually and give them their certificate.
Now, you served as chief judge of the district court here for almost 15 years.
Right.
And you made a number of reforms that were very significant during your tenure as chief judge. Tell us about the most important of those.
Well, the one that I just mentioned to you, the requirement that the U.S. attorney turn over the file. The next thing was I did adopt a set of local rules which pretty much delineated practice in this court.
Prior to that time, the
There
Southern
weren't any.
District didn't have any local rules?
None whatever, no.
Because now all courts
Judge
have...
Lawrence did not believe in them.
All courts have local rules.
Yes,
now,
as far as I know, yes, all of them do.
And what were some of the, other than in criminal cases requiring the district attorney to turn over the file, what were some of the other things,
Well,
the rules?
the pretrial orders, the practice of at pretrial hearings to decide every potential problem that might arise during the trial, so that you make a record on it and obviate the necessity of arguing during the trial of the case, which meant that the case could get over with much more quickly in a neater fashion as far as the jury is concerned. And as a result, got better verdicts, as I thought.
I know as a lawyer myself that the Southern District has a reputation that the judges strictly enforce the rules and that there's very little tolerance of disobedience of the rules or that kind of thing. Would you say that that's...
Well, you're right about that. That's one of the things you learned.
A lot of courts, lawyers feel like they can get away with things and therefore they try.
Yes.
But, and probably coming from practicing with Reuben Garland, that probably impressed on you the need for rules.
Very much. But it makes a tremendous difference in the way the jury perceives the case. And after all, that's the purpose of the entire system.
One of the unusual things about the American system of justice is the jury of peers.
Yes.
And you've now tried many, many cases and observed it. Are you a big fan of the jury?
Yes.
Because
they do a better job than I do.
If you were accused of a crime, would you rather be tried by jury?
Very much so.
I think that's very interesting and significant. Yes. Another thing that's been written about some recently is the apparent demise of professionalism and civility among lawyers and in court proceedings. And of course, you've tried, although you sit here in the Southern District, you've tried cases all over the country.
Yes, sir.
And I wonder what observations do you have about civility and professionalism?
Well, fortunately, I've not encountered that sort of thing. I don't know whether it's because I look bad or look mean or whatever it may be. But down here, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we enforce the rules, and the lawyers know we enforce them. So they don't. We don't get any problem with the lawyers. And in these other places that I've sat, they're always a little skittish about a visiting judge, so they don't bother you much.
If they read about your background of having been a World War II prisoner of war and tried to escape 4 times, that probably would put them a little at being careful too.
Well, I don't know about that, but at any rate, I've never had any problem with the lawyers.
Now, how is it that you try cases outside this court? In other words, of course, you were invited to come into Atlanta for the airport case.
Well, they invite you in, to assist in cases or in districts where they're kind of overwhelmed with pending cases. You know.
And I've read somewhere that you have been brought in frequently where a given court might be overloaded to
Yes.
clear out the docket, so to speak.
Yes. You know.
How many different cases?
Number of them. Number in Florida, Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville, Gainesville, St. Louis, Chicago, New Orleans, Toledo, Cincinnati, so on, Pittsburgh.
Now, you sit as a trial judge
Yes.
in the federal trial
Yes.
court, and then the next highest court up is the Court of Appeals.
It is.
And the next highest is the Supreme Court.
Yes.
But on occasion, you will sit on the appellate court.
Yes.
And how does that happen?
Well, they call you and say, we need some help. Will you do it? And I'd reluctantly say yes because I don't like it. To tell you the truth.
That was going to be my question. How, in terms of enjoyment, you enjoy trying a case more than you do
Oh, much more so.
being an appellate judge?
No, all you do up there is read briefs. And I'd hate to consign myself to a lifetime of reading briefs.
Much more interesting being in the
Well, of
courtroom.
course, sure.
Well, this has certainly been a fascinating interview, Judge Alaimo, and I very much appreciate your doing it, and I'm sure that the transcript will be put to good use at the Russell Library.
Well, I've fumbled through it and not been quite as lucid as I should have been, but nevertheless, that's the way it is.